What if this was actually how the 2003 NBA draft looked? What if we just completely eliminate LeBron from the history of the NBA? What would the nearly 20 years since this 2003 draft have looked like in the NBA? Briefly, I'm going to give my reasoning for why I think the draft would have went in this order, and then we're going to talk about the thousands of things that would have changed had LeBron never come into the NBA. First of all, Carmelo Anthony is coming off of a national championship season at Syracuse. He was arguably the best player in college basketball the year prior. I feel like he fits the mold of a franchise player the best. He goes to Cleveland. Detroit 6 with Darko because they wanted him initially anyway. 3, I'm going to put D-Wade in Denver because I feel like based off rumors, that's the guy they would have picked and a guy that they really liked had Carmelo not fallen to them at 3. And then at 4, we're going to go Chris Bosh, still going to Toronto. And after that, the draft really isn't that consequential. So we're going to stick to these 4 teams. We're going to stick to these 4 players and then some of the impacts that their different careers now they're going to have without LeBron, how that would have impacted the league in the 20 years since this draft. Okay, so let's start with Cleveland. I think it's obvious that Cleveland is still going to be a good basketball team. Carmelo Anthony is not on the level of someone like LeBron James in terms of an all-around player, but still very good. And that's kind of where I land with Cleveland here. They're still going to end up being good, but not great. They don't win a title prior to 2010, just like they didn't when LeBron was there. But after 2010, things get really interesting. So in 2011, Carmelo requests a trade to New York, ultimately ends up getting traded to the Knicks. And Cleveland also ends up drafting Kyrie Irving in 2011. And why 2011 is important is because in comparison to LeBron ending up in Cleveland, Carmelo would have been with the team through the 2011 season, because when their first contract extensions came up, Carmelo ended up with the 5-year extension that took him all the way through 2012, whereas Dwayne Wade, Chris Bosh, and LeBron all signed 3-year extensions that allowed them to leave in 2010, and that ultimately is what caused them to team up, which we're going to get to later. That doesn't happen for Carmelo. He stays until 2011. You might think, okay, well, Carmelo being there in 2011 means that the Cavs don't end up with Kyrie with the first pick in 2011. They're not bad enough to earn the first pick in the 2011 draft. Well, actually, that's not exactly how it would have worked out, because the Cavs ending up with Kyrie in 2011 had to do with the fact that they had the Clippers pick in that draft in a salary dump for Baron Davis, not the 4th pick in the draft, which was their own, in which they drafted Tristan Thompson. So in this scenario where they end up with Carmelo, let's assume that Carmelo still wants to go to New York. He still has the desire to play for the Knicks. He plays, for Cleveland for the same time span from 2003 to 2011 that he did with Denver. Had some good moments. They never make the finals, just as he never did in Denver. He requests a trade to New York. They trade him to New York. They get all of this stuff back. They get the Melo Knicks trade package, and they have Kyrie in 2011. That changes some things for their future. Obviously, they don't have LeBron returning in 2014, so they might not ever reach championship heights, but they have a lot of assets. They have a lot more stuff going on for them around Kyrie, and LeBron never being there means that he might not have requested a trade ultimately because he wanted to get away from LeBron, and ultimately that means that he would not have, Kyrie in this case, would not have ended up in Boston, which means they don't get Colin Sexton, which means they don't have an important piece in the eventual now Donovan Mitchell trade. Now with Kyrie, out of anything in this video, it's the least easy thing to determine exactly what would happen if he would have ended up leaving anyway. Boston, Brooklyn, whatever the case may be, Kyrie's hard to predict. However, it's interesting how much that would have shifted just LeBron not being there in Cleveland. But there's a lot of other stuff we got to get to, because now we get to D-Wade, the Melo replacement in Denver. And I think generally his career goes pretty much the same from an individual perspective, still develops into a really good player. Obviously doesn't win the title in 2006 with Denver because he doesn't have Shaq alongside him. We're going to get to Miami here a little bit later. However, I think the Team USA stuff with him still happens. Like the thing that allowed that Miami 2010 decision situation to come together, I think still happens even without LeBron. I still think he goes in place for Team USA. So does Chris Bosh. They get together their plan and they all decide to, or both in this case, decide to leave for free agency in 2010, but instead of going to Miami, I think they end up going to Chicago. Chris Bosh was rumored to be like already kind of committed to Chicago before the Miami thing came into play. D-Wade has connections certainly with Chicago, ultimately played for them anyway, even with LeBron in the league. And that is a scenario that I think is incredibly interesting because you've got Derrick Rose there, you've got Joakim Noah there, you've got Luol Deng. Maybe they would have had to move some salaries. They eventually ended up bringing in Carlos Boozer, basically in place of Chris Bosh, who they thought they had in the summer of 2010. But you're now adding Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh to that nucleus in Chicago that is a year away from getting really, really good. And the following season, you go to the 2011 season, that's when Derrick Rose wins his MVP as the youngest MVP in league history. And obviously that doesn't happen here, but there's a lot of adjustments to be made. And for the most part in this new scenario, this is the new Miami. Chicago becomes the new Miami just without LeBron and replacing him with Derrick Rose, Joakim Noah, Luol Deng, a really well-rounded roster there in Chicago. And of course, in terms of what that changes, it's a lot. So you have the 2011 MVP. It's unlikely that Rose would ultimately win win that now with Bosh and Wade there, but of course they're going to be really good. 2011, Miami makes the finals normally. They're not there in this scenario. Dallas wins that title, but I think that title is up in the air when you compare that Chicago team to that Dallas team now with these changes. And then of course the 12 and 13 titles are also up in the air because there's no LeBron, Chris Bosh, and Dwayne Wade in Miami. Speaking of Miami, this obviously changes a lot for them as well because they have the 5th pick in this draft. And if you eliminate LeBron from this top 5, they're at the drop-off point of this draft. They don't get D-Wade, they don't get Carmelo, they don't get Chris Bosh. And they also, by the way, don't trade for Shaq. They don't win the title in 2006. Getting Dwayne Wade in this draft changed everything over the following couple of seasons for Miami. And they're certainly never as good as they were in that 2006 season, which they won the title. That leaves another title up for grabs because they don't have D-Wade, they don't have Shaq. And of course, they never reached the heights that they did with the Heatles winning the 12 and 13 titles. Also, by the way, what do we do with Shaq back when they traded for him in the early 2000s? Well, one team that I think is really interesting to keep an eye on here would have been the Dallas Mavericks, a team that Shaq reportedly would have been willing to go to. And of course, they end up meeting Miami in the finals in 2006. The problem is the rumors at the time were that Dallas would have possibly traded Dirk Nowitzki to LA. Now, I don't think they would have done that. He started to come into his own, started to become Dirk. He was pretty good in the playoffs the year prior. And I just don't think that they would have traded Dirk in exchange for Shaq. If they did, obviously that changes a lot of Lakers stuff that we can get to later. But let's just assume for the moment that Dallas does end up becoming the landing spot for Shaq, but they don't trade away Dirk. That, of course, changes some things for them in terms of that 2006 title, what their team looked like in the few years afterwards in Dallas. And then for LA, bringing in Lamar Odom in that Shaq trade was a big deal for them and someone that really helped them in the following couple of years, winning the title in 2009, 2010. Those things might be up in the air here as well. And then, of course, we get to the second half of LeBron's tenure in Cleveland. If he just doesn't exist, just think about all the different things that happen. Think about the teams that just couldn't get past the LeBron wall, right? Like we've got the Paul George Pacers, we've got Kyle Lowry and DeMar DeRozan in Toronto, but most importantly here is the 73-9 2016 Golden State Warriors that blew a 3-1 lead in the finals to LeBron, to Kyrie, to an incredible basketball team. And if that doesn't happen, and you can tell where I'm going with this, right? If Golden State wins a title in 2016, which I think they would have if LeBron just didn't exist, then Kevin Durant never joins Golden State in the following couple of seasons, which leaves a ton of titles up in the air in that Golden State era as well. Also, not to mention, LeBron never goes to LA in 2018, which means we probably never get an Anthony Davis trade to LA. And then there's no Clutch Sports, which opens up a ton of other things. So by my count, let me just read these off so I know I'm not getting them wrong. Here are the things that we now need to account for because LeBron just doesn't exist. So of course, we have LeBron's MVPs in 2009, 2010, 12, and 13. We have Derrick Rose's MVP in 2011, and we have the 2017 MVP because that was Russell Westbrook. That obviously doesn't happen if Kevin Durant is still in Oklahoma City, as he probably would have been had the Warriors won the title in 2016. Speaking of titles we need to get figured out, we have 12, 13, 16, and 20. Those are all LeBron's. And then we have 2006 and 2011. Those are both D-Wade's. And then of course we have 17 and 18. Those are both KD's in Golden State. Now, in terms of MVPs, one of the interesting ways you can look at this is you can just go look up who won second place in that MVP if you're just eliminating the player that won it for a variety of different reasons, as we just talked about in the previous section. So, for example, 2009, Kobe Bryant was second. He would have won another MVP in 2009 in the scenario. 2010, 22-year-old Kevin Durant placed second in MVP voting, which means that he kind of would have supplanted Derrick Rose in this situation as the youngest MVP in league history, because in 2011, as we're about to talk about, Rose is also not going to win the MVP. That's going to go to Dwight Howard, who placed second for Orlando, a team that was really, really good that season. I actually don't know if I ever knew that Dwight Howard was second in MVP voting in 2011. Then 2012 and 13, both of those also would have gone to Kevin Durant. You want to talk about a player really benefiting from LeBron never entering the league. Now Kevin Durant has 3 extra MVPs. And then in 2017, James Harden was actually second, but as we're going to talk about a little bit later, that Oklahoma City situation might have been a little bit different as well, which means that Harden might not have won the MVP. But if you just go strictly by who was second in 2017 behind Russ, it would have been James Harden. Now, in terms of the titles we have to account for, in 2006, I'm going to say that probably it ends up being Dallas. There's no real way to know how a potential Shaq trade would have impacted them, whatever would have happened with LA if maybe they ended up keeping Shaq. But point being, they're really good in 2006. The only reason they didn't win the title is because of that Heat team that had Shaq. If Shaq doesn't exist in Miami and their roster is relatively the same, I'm going to give them the 2006 title. 2011, I'm actually going to give it to Chicago. I know that doesn't make a ton of sense because Miami was the team that got to the finals. We're eliminating Miami from this, but Dallas beat that Heat team. That Heat team was a little bit broken in parts of the finals, especially LeBron. He was really, really bad. And I think in terms of a well-rounded roster and a roster that it would have worked a little bit better immediately, this new Chicago group with Rose and Wade and Bosh and Noah and Deng, I think they would have beaten that Mavs team in 2011, but it's fine because you get the 2006 title. Dirk still ends up with one. Jason Kidd and some of the other veterans don't get a title on that team, but that's fine. Then we go to 2012, and that's actually going to be Oklahoma City. Remember, that's LeBron's first title in Miami. They end up beating Oklahoma City in 5 games, but that series was really, really close. And if you take away LeBron, you take away the Heatles from that, Oklahoma City was really good in that postseason. They're probably going going to win that title. And keep in mind, that's the season in which they ended up trading away James Harden away from Oklahoma City. After that finals, they made the decision that they didn't want to have this team together anymore. They wanted to trade him away. They didn't want to trade him, whatever the case may be. The Harden trade happens in October of 2012. I don't think they're trading away James Harden if they had just won the title the prior season. 2013, I'm going to give to San Antonio. That was an incredible San Antonio team. They barely lost to Miami in the first place. That was the crazy Ray Allen, LeBron, Chris Bosh knocks the rebound out to Ray Allen in the corner shot. I'm going to give the 2013 title to San Antonio in the scenario if Miami doesn't exist. 2016, of course, I'm going to give to Golden State. 73-9, the 3-1 comeback. The only team that could have made that happen would have been LeBron and Cleveland. They don't exist in this scenario. I'm going to give the Warriors a 16 title. 17, I'm going to give to San Antonio. That is, if you don't have Kevin Durant there and it's just Steph and it's Clay and it's Draymond, they're running it back with the depth. I understand how good Golden State was and their record was better that year than San Antonio's, but that's with Kevin Durant. And this 17 year was an incredible Kawhi and Spurs season. And if they don't match up in the first round because Golden State's not as good, or they're the 1 seed, or not the first round, whatever the case may be, wherever they ended up meeting, where Zaza Pachulia lands on, Kawhi's foot, all this, that, and the other, I think San Antonio is probably winning the title in 2017. That was a really, really good team if Golden State does not have Kevin Durant. 2018, I'm going to give to Houston. Same thing. No KD. That Rockets team was unbelievable. That's the team that missed 27 straight threes in game 6 or 7, or whatever the case may be. They were the best team in the league outside of the Kevin Durant Golden State Warriors, which were basically unbeatable. You take Kevin Durant away, I'm going to take Houston in that series. And then 2020 is the bubble season, and who knows what would happen there? Who knows what the rosters would have looked like? But I'm going to say that Miami ultimately would have won the title in 2020. So they end up with one. Dallas still ends up with one. Miami ends up with significantly less. Chicago gets one. A lot of different things change, and you can really, really, really dig into this and push this out to about 1,000 different possibilities in terms of what this means for for the Lakers and for, as I said, Miami and Dallas and all these teams. It's really, really interesting how, of course, probably the most impactful player the last 20 years in the NBA. You change one thing about the league, and all these different things could have happened or happened differently if LeBron James had never existed.